As a kid growing up, my family and I would vacation to a city in the state of Georgia called Savannah. And Savannah is a beautiful place, and one of the most well-known streets in Savannah is Jones Street. And Jones Street is this street that's covered in bricks from the 1600s, and the sidewalks are old, and there are these massive row houses and trees that overhang the street, and there's this Spanish moss that covers it. So even when the sun is out, there's no light getting in. It's just always dim, and it's beautiful. And on the bottom floor of one of these row houses is a restaurant. Now, this restaurant is become sort of world-renowned. It's in books about some of the places you have to eat before you die, and it's in an old boarding house. It's called Mrs. Wilkes Boarding House, and it was a boarding house back in 1943, and people would live there, and they would be fed there, and it's since been turned into a restaurant by the family that's owned it, and Mrs. Wilkes is an experience like no other. As you get to Mrs. Wilkes, the restaurant opens at 11. And when you get there, you get set, it's family style, so you get set around a large table with people that you don't know and up until that moment did not want to interact with at all. And they begin to bring out plates upon plates of food. Food like fried chicken and cabbage and cornbread and biscuits and rice and rolls, and some of you are now ready to go to lunch already. They bring out up to 30 plates of food, plus cobbler and banana pudding for dessert, because you can't have a meal like that without dessert. They bring all this out, and you sit and you eat. Someone says grace before the meal. You clear your own place setting when you're done, and you pay, and then you leave. Now, the worst part about Mrs. Wilkes is that when it's 8 a.m. and you haven't gotten out of bed yet, the line begins to form. The line begins to form at least 8 a.m., and it is incredible. You can't even see where it starts, and you can't even see where it ends. It wraps around the entire block. Now, this is the crazy part. They only serve lunch until 2 p.m. So if you are in that line and 2 p.m. hits, you are not getting in that day. And as you look, the photo's gone. As you look at that photo, you realize that a mass amount of people who have been waiting all day to get in to have this meal that is going to be incredible, they are going to miss out on an experience. Have you ever had a moment like that in life where you feel like you have simply missed out on something? And maybe it's something that goes beyond a restaurant or a great meal, but like you were missing out on something important, something significant, something that could be life-changing or legacy-defining. You know, we don't want to miss out on those moments. We would love to be able to sort of capture them and hold on to them. You know, we've been in this series called Dark Horses, where we've been looking at the lives of characters throughout history in the scriptures that have had these incredible calls of God placed on them, but they were really nobody up until that moment happened. They were insignificant, they were nothing. We looked at the life of Nehemiah, who God called to go somewhere and rebuild this wall around his city, to protect his people, to sort of reestablish their identity. We looked at the story of Moses that God talked to through a bush that was on fire for too long, and he said, I want you to save all of your people and take them to the promised land. And then we talked about this guy named Gideon, who is a war hero, but when God approaches him, he is hiding behind a tree, and yet he calls him a mighty warrior. The stories that we've looked at so far in this series have been stories of people that God has said, hey, your calling is out there. But what happens when the opportunity is right in front of you? What happens when the opportunity is brought to you? Because here's the truth about calling. Opportunities are caught. They're not created. See, often we think that we have to go outside of ourselves to find out what God is trying to do, but often God brings those moments right in front of you, and to catch a God-given opportunity, you simply have to be paying attention to what God is already doing. So today we're going to look at the story. We've looked at the story of 3 guys, so I figure we should look at the story of a woman. Ladies, are you with me? Yeah, all right, okay. We're going to look at the story of a woman named Esther. Now, Esther is an incredible figure. She saved more lives than any other person in the Bible, which is hard to imagine, but she saves more than any one person, and it was because she realized that opportunities aren't always created, that they're not always about power and influence and resources and having skills and gifts that are better than everyone else, but that you can actually catch the opportunity that is right in front of you. You can seize the moment that God puts in front of you to live this life of significance. Now, the challenge that I have is to tell you this story that is its own book in the Bible in less than 25 minutes. This is about to be a roller coaster ride. So in order to do this well, we're gonna break this down into 4 scenes. The first scene is going to appropriately be titled The Hangover, like many of your favorite Hollywood film. You won't admit it, but we know it. We're gonna call it The Hangover. It starts with this king, and his name is Xerxes, and King Xerxes is the king of Persia. And he was a big deal, right? He had leadership from what was Asia Minor, which we would consider modern day Turkey, down into Africa and into parts of India. But Xerxes was not the best guy. He wasn't an honorable man. He was pretentious. He wasn't really a thinker that could solve things on his own. He's always had people telling him how to live his life. And when you read through this story, you realize he really has no depth. He lacks any sort of depth or self-awareness. And you see this in that he throws a party to honor himself that lasts 187 days. Some of you are like, I would just like a real birthday party for once. This dude is like, I'm gonna throw a party for myself for 187 days. There's elaborate decorations and incredible food, incredible drinks. This was an open bar sort of situation, more like a 187-day kegger kind of thing going on. And these guys are partying until they can't party anymore. Now the king is married to this beautiful, intelligent woman named Vashti. Her name's Queen Vashti, and she is summoned by the king to come down to his party and to display her beauty for the men that are there. And she very politely says, nah, bro, not gonna happen. Now, this is more than just a wife saying to her husband, you cannot buy the bass boat that you want. This is a wife saying to her husband, I have more self-respect than that. I have more dignity than that. Well, you have been partying, and I'm not gonna come down after 187 days of Miller time and hang out with your boys. I'm gonna run this kingdom that you aren't running. Her no infuriated Xerxes so much he divorced her on the spot. Talk about bad conflict management. He ends their relationship on the spot. Now, for the king, this solved an immediate issue. He had this wife who he didn't feel was respecting him at all. But it created another problem. He needed a new wife, because no self-respecting king cannot have a wife. So we're gonna jump to the second scene, which we are going to call The Bachelor. His subjects approach him and say, King, we have this brilliant idea. What if we go out and get all the beautiful women that we can find? We'll bring them here to the palace, and we can have rose ceremonies and champagne fiascos, and you might need to jump a fence at one point, but we will figure out who your new wife will be. Now, I need to take an aside to just point this out. We read this and it's kind of funny, and it's like, oh, we do this now, but it's on TV. That's really the only difference. What's happening in this story is sex trafficking. They're going out, men of power and influence, and bringing in girls, not women, girls, to become married to another grown adult man. This is sex trafficking dressed up in this story. Now, that might shock some of you to believe that there was once a culture where grown men would try to impress younger people by showing how much power and money and wealth that they have, but believe it or not, there was once a culture that was like that. Some of you will catch that joke later in the car, but there's a joke there. Just hold on to it. So this woman arrives. She's a refugee in Syria. She's a Jew. She is a dark horse. She is truly a nobody, and her name is Esther. This is what it says happened to Esther. Esther chapter 2, verse 9. It says, she pleased him and won his favor, him being the king. Immediately, he provided her with her beauty treatments. Her beauty treatments, get this, lasted at least a year. Talk about getting prepared for a date that you didn't want to go on. and special food. He assigned her to 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem. Now, the writer of Esther's story is about to slip this verse in here. Verse 10, Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai, who we'll get to in a minute, had forbidden her to do so. The king is falling in love with her, but he's unaware of who she really is. Her nationality is going to play a significant role in this story. It says every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem. He's sort of a stalker, but we'll let it go. To find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. He's gaga for Esther. He's in love with her. He wants nothing more than for her to be his wife, and so that's exactly what happens. She gets the final rose. They get married. She goes from nothing to a queen. Now we're going to move to this third scene, which we're going to call The Irishman. If you haven't seen that movie, you should watch it. It'll make sense. If you haven't, just bear with me on this. This new character was just introduced. His name's Mordecai. And Mordecai is like Esther's father figure, except that he's not actually her dad. Her parents have been killed. He is her cousin, but he's cared for her like a father. And he suggests to Esther, listen, you need to keep your true identity a secret. He doesn't tell her to lie about it. He just says, don't disclose it. Maybe a time will come when that is necessary. And then this is how Mordecai gets brought into the story. It says, during the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, 2 terrible names, by the way, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther. Now listen, Esther at this point is riding high. She is no longer even really a dark horse. She is the queen of a massive empire. And I think we have something significant to learn from what happens to her as Mordecai brings this awful truth to her. God has called you all to significant things. And at some point, you will find yourself in the midst of power and influence and affluence, and it's because God has called you there. You've been placed there on purpose. But the key question that must be answered when it comes to your calling is your character ready to support your calling? Listen, you're an ordinary person now, but someday when the calling on your life begins to take shape, the thing that will support your calling is not your talents and your gifts and the people who follow you on social media. It's your character. It's who you are behind closed doors. Listen, for some of you, this is a struggle in business, at your jobs. Have you found yourself lying to cover up your mistakes? Have you found yourself risking your reputation just to save a little bit of money, maybe even a lot of money? See, the question about character is, are you willing to do the right thing, even when it hurts? Think about in your relationships, in your marriage. Have there been moments where you found yourself wondering if the spouse that you have isn't everything they were cracked up to be? And you find yourself going, I wonder if the grass is truly greener. Because see, the problem with relationships is if you fail in them, you will ultimately fail in other places. Maybe if you're a student in here even, you believe that God has something significant placed on your life. He's called you to do something incredible. The problem is that the amount of people who like you doesn't make a difference, but who you are behind closed doors is what will matter. Listen, is your character ready to support the calling that God has placed on your life? Can you be honest when it matters? Can you remember that your skills and gifts is not what actually has gotten you to that place, but it's God himself? Now listen, the only way that we maintain and develop character is through one thing. It's called wisdom. The scriptures point this out all the time. It's not about intelligence. It's not about how many degrees you have. It's not about how many followers on social media you have. It's about the wisdom that you have. And Esther's wisdom is about to be put to the test. Chapter 2, verse 22, it says, but Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the 2 officials were impaled on poles. The king don't play. Now, what's important to know here is that when this happens, the king celebrates Mordecai. He puts his name in what is called the Annals of the King, which was essentially this long-running document that kings would use to document their reign and their leadership. What happened? What successes were there? What failures happened? Who was around to help? And Esther reports this plot, and she gives all the credit to Mordecai. Mordecai was the person in her corner, telling her what was right, cheering her on. The question for some of you today is, who is your Mordecai? Or do you have one? Who's the person that's in your corner going, God has called you to this. He wants you to step out in faith and do something significant, but are you gonna do it the right way? Are you gonna do it with honor and integrity and dignity? And are you going to treat others well in the midst of it? Is your character ready to support your calling, and who will be around to support you? Now, this story, this moment in Esther's story could feel like a fitting end to what's going on, but it's just the beginning. See, you can be like Esther and have a Mordecai on your team, or you can be like King Xerxes and have this next character on your team. The new character that I want to introduce to you is a man named Haman. This is what it says, Esther chapter 3. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate, catch this, knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Jumping down to verse 5, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Mordecai protests this idea that he would worship anyone that was not the creator of the universe. He stands up for it. And this infuriates this man named Haman, and he says, it would not be enough for me to just take my anger out on Mordecai. I need to kill all of his people. Again, just an aside, I need to point out that what's being proposed here is not just sinful. This is the embodiment of evil. This is mass genocide. This is Hitler status stuff that is being proposed. And Haman feels no remorse, no regret. He casts lots, which is this superstition of how to make a decision, and he picks a day of when this attack will take place. He funds this killing campaign. He plans to make money off of the death of this people group. It says the dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. And as you can imagine, as these letters are being sent out, the Jews are mortified. They're terrified. Most of them are in mourning. They've been given an execution date. And Mordecai is so stressed out, he sends a message to Esther by way of a servant, and he says, you have to speak with the king. He's your husband. You have to do something. Esther, these are your people. And Esther initially responds, and she says, 30 days have passed since I've seen the king. This is not the best time for me to reveal who I actually am. 30 days have passed. She's married to this guy. She hasn't seen him in 30 days. Now, I know some of you are thinking, I'd be okay if I didn't see my husband for 30 days. She hasn't seen him in 30 days. She says, I can't even have a conversation with this guy. Listen, the truth is that when opportunities present themselves, there'll always be a reason to not respond. I don't have the equity. I don't have the influence. I don't have the resources. Nobody will even listen to me. And Esther's excuse sets up what I believe is the most significant verse in this entire book. And I think it's what God wants to say to some of us this morning. Esther chapter 4, verse 12. It says, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. In other words, it doesn't matter if you're royalty, you're gonna die too. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. Esther, you can stand back, but God's still gonna do something. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. There are two words in the scriptures for time. The first is the word chronos, which is where we get the word chronology. It's a linear understanding of time. It's the way humans, we understand how time works, right? It's about clocks and calendars and the past, the present, and the future. It's linear. It goes from back to forward. Now, according to Greek mythology, Kronos was this strong-legged, short god who ran in heels and had no hair in the back but a ponytail coming off the front of his forehead. It's not a good look. I don't suggest it to anyone. And the idea was that as you lived life, as you stood still, Kronos would try to run past you, and if you missed him, then you missed out on every opportunity, every significant thing that you could be a part of. But there's another word for time in the scriptures, and it's kairos. And this is not quantitative. This is not about moving from one point to the next. This is qualitative. It's describing the kind of time that exists. It's where we get the phrase carpe diem, which means to seize the day. And with kairos, the idea was that as Kronos, this Greek god, attempted to sprint past you, if you could pay enough attention, if you could focus in, you could reach out right in front and grab him by his ponytail and catch your opportunity. And this is what Mordecai is saying to Esther, that maybe the position you are in right now is to make the most of an opportunity, to catch what is in front of you. You don't need to go somewhere else to build a wall. You don't need to go somewhere else to lead people to freedom. You need to address what is right in front of you. I mean, can't you just hear him? Esther, don't underestimate God's timing. Don't miss what he's trying to do. The fate of a whole nation, of your people, is in your hands. You didn't ask for it, but it's here. You've been brought to this point in your life, not for the sake of accumulating a great wardrobe or gems or eating incredible food. You've been brought to this point in your life to be a part of the redeeming work that God is trying to do. So don't let your success at filling a stereotype as a woman blind you to what God says your life is really about. Mordecai looks at her and just says, don't miss this God-ordained moment. You know why I think we miss most of these moments? I think all too often we allow comfort to control our calling. We find ourselves sort of leaning back into our comfort zone. You might be like, well, I don't have a comfort zone. All of us have a comfort zone. It's the space where we feel safe and warm and cozy and out of harm's way. But if we're honest, we rarely find God in the midst of our comfort zones. You may be there, but God is calling you to something else. So let me ask you, if you stay in your comfort zone, where will your life drift? Maybe for some of you, it's image. So you care so much about if people think you look good, and that's how you're gonna get them to admire you and respect you. For some of us, it's about money. So we don't care just about having enough to get by. We wanna have more and more and more. And if we don't have more and more and more, then frankly, we are just not good enough. Maybe for you, it's like power. So you lord over people until they feel insignificant and they know just how significant you are. Or maybe for Christians, it's spirituality. It's faith. You become so prideful in what it means to follow Jesus that you're actually not even really following Jesus anymore. You've just become self-righteous and you look down on other people. And at some point, we find ourselves, instead of going away from comfort, we hop on easy street and we miss the moment. And I think Esther's story is trying to tell us one thing: do not miss the moment. This last scene in Esther's story we're gonna call Die Hard, because she's about to be so brave that it's stupid. She has all these, that's good. She's had all these people around her going, you can't reveal your identity. Because at the end of the day, Esther, you're still safe. If no one knows you're a Jew, you'll be safe. Just stay quiet, just stay in your lane. And she finally thinks about it and she looks at Mordecai and she goes, when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Esther's mindset has gone from if it's too risky to now if I die, but I know I die doing the right thing. See, a lot of us have these moments where we look back and we realize that we've fallen into our comfort zone, but some of us are one brave decision away from the most significant adventure of our lives. One brave decision. Which is why when you walked in today, you should have noticed there's a card sitting on your seat. Can you all just entertain me and grab that card for a second? I can see those of you not grabbing it. We'll judge you later. You'll notice on that card, there's a space for you to commit to something. Just to write your name at the bottom and fill in that blank with something. We know that many of you have been with us through this 21 days of prayer and through this sermon series. You've been thinking about what it is that God might want from you. What is the thing that God is saying, hey, I want you to commit to doing something greater? For many of you, God has spoken to you about your career and he says, hey, you need to leave your job. You need to start a nonprofit. Maybe you need to actually go into full-time ministry. You need to love people the way that I've loved them. For some of you, it's about your family. He's calling you to serve at-risk kids once a month. He's calling your family to step up and adopt and foster. For some of you, it's about your finances. God's saying, hey, I don't even need the full 10%, but I just want you to start giving something. I want you to be generous with what I've blessed you with. For some of you, it's at work to become a high integrity leader, to begin to invest in people for the first time, to no longer make business about a profit, but to make it about people. Maybe if you're a student, the realization is that God has called you to your school for such a time as this. Not to be alone, not to be like everyone else, but to be someone significant in the space that you're currently in. Because much like Esther, I think for all of us, our time has come. We can step up and commit to something. So what we want you to do is fill in that blank, and we're gonna sing a song here in a minute and just reflect on what God is trying to say to us, and we'll drop those in the buckets, but we have to finish Esther's story first. She's walking down this hall towards the king, and I imagine with every step, she's terrified. There's all these moments where she's like, I could just turn back. I don't need to do this. I could stop, but she presses forward. And because it's a capital offense to approach the king, his security comes up and scoops her up. And the king sees it and he says, Esther, what are you doing? What is it that you want? What's your request? This king really loved her and he said, I'll give you up to half of my kingdom, but what is it that you need? She knows that Xerxes likes to party and eat and drink, and so she invites him to dinner along with their friend Haman, the enemy of her people, and it'll be just the three of them at dinner. And they go to sit down, and the king says, Esther, what do you need? And the fear has not really gone away. She's just in the moment now. And I imagine her sort of clutching on the side of her chair and just thinking, how can I get out of this? Maybe I can fake sick real fast and just run to the bathroom. And she says, let's have dinner again tomorrow night. And Xerxes is not very smart in the first place, so he doesn't care. He knows he's getting another meal, but Haman is completely oblivious to what's about to happen. And tomorrow comes, and Esther finally commits, and she steps up with the courage, and she says, there's a plot against my people. I'm actually Jewish, and there's a plot to murder all of them. And the king is blown away. He says, who in their right mind would set up something such as this? And she points across the table and says, Haman. And in this quick motion, the king has Haman taken and hanged on the gallows that Haman had built for the Jewish people to be killed on. It's the ultimate reveal. Esther, in this brief moment of courage, saves her people. And the best part is the king looks at her and goes, I need a new chief of staff. And she says, what about Mordecai? The guy who saved you once already. The guy who saved my life, the guy of good character and good standing, the guy who has helped me live into my calling. And so Mordecai becomes the new chief of staff and inherits everything that Haman had. The Jewish people are saved all because one woman said no to a life of comfort and safety and security and wealth. And she said yes to following God to the point of even giving her life. Now, I don't know about you, but as I read stories like this, I always think, man, these sound really great. But my life isn't like that. I don't have someone coming to me going, here's this opportunity, grab it. The interesting thing about the story of Esther is that God is never once mentioned in her story. Never once. Which is sort of how our lives are, right? Don't get me wrong, we believe in God, we trust in Jesus, but we rarely see God working right in front of us. We know he's present, we want to believe that, but we don't see him right there. Some of you are trying to figure out what it is that God is calling you to, what he wants you to commit to, and you're going, where is God in the midst of even that question? What do I commit to? You can't see him working, you don't see his involvement, but I think God gave us a story like Esther so that we could know that even when we don't see him, he's present. That even when we don't see him, he's at work. Even when we don't see him, you are not alone. You are filled with courage, and he has called you to a greater life. And maybe some of you have been coming to church for a while, but you feel like you've heard the same thing about Jesus, that he's good, but you've never experienced him. Our hope is that you would know that the God of the universe loved you so much, he stepped into time at the right moment to lay down his life so that you could have life and have it here and now. Jesus was real and present. He is not distant and far off. He is in your story. For some of you, what you need to commit to is not an action, but it's a relationship. You need to commit to following Jesus with everything that you have. And in a few weekends, we're gonna have a decision weekend, and you're gonna get to mark that by being baptized. Listen, your time has come. So commit. Can I pray for you this morning? God, we are incredibly thankful that you are with us right now. God, that you do not run away from us, that you do not leave us in the midst of our most difficult moments, but that you are present. Even when we can't see you or hear you, we know that you're here. God, for the mother and father who feel like God is asking them to step up as parents with the kids that they already have, or maybe with fostering or adopting, God, we ask that you would fill them with courage. For the person who has questioned their career for the last 5 years, we ask that you would challenge them and give them the courage to step out and trust you in faith and do something that can change the world. God, for the person who's just a part of this campus and wants to figure out how to make a difference here, we ask that they would step up to serve with kids and students and with guests and with everything that is going on here at this campus. God, we're so thankful for what we're seeing happen. God, and for the person who is unsure if you are even real, we ask that in the next few minutes, as we sit and as we reflect, that you would speak to them. That they would not be able to leave this place until they know that the God of the universe loves them deeply. That the God of the universe has chased them down and that he's trying to do something new in their life. God, we're thankful for Jesus and his sacrifice. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen.